So, shalom,
Shalom.
and welcome back to the practical Parsha for Parshat Vayeira. I want to highlight this week a an extremely important theme in the life of Avrohom Avinu, our father, our patriarch Abraham, and as a result, in our lives, his descendants, biological and spiritual descendants, we have it in our DNA, and that is doing loving kindness. That is specifically, as we see in this parsha, the mitzvah of hachnasat orchim. Literally means to host guests, which means to take care of people's needs, strangers, people who are hungry, people who need a place to put their head down, a place to feel a little warmth. This is what Avrohom engaged in. Avram and Sarah, as we've spoken in the past, were considerably rich. As we know, they were very, very pious. They were very religious and spiritual. In other words, thank God they had what to spend their time with. They had the means to have a very enjoyable, relaxed life, as most people really aspire. It's just, to be more relaxed, less work, more me time. And instead, they did the exact opposite. What is it that they engaged in? They not only opened their home, which is a great thing in itself, but they created not a home, but a mansion, a whole institution, as we'll soon see, in which they can now attract their guests and they can now afford people this opportunity to come in and find not only a little shelter from the cold, from the heat as it was there, but a place that they can, as we'll see here, satisfy their hearts, literally fill their bellies, fill their minds, enjoy the comforts of a beautiful home as if it was theirs. Avraham, be pampered, that's the word, I like it, as we'll soon see. Avraham and Sarah didn't only provide the needs of their guests in the material sense, but they also provided them, imagine, it was a one-stop shop. It was a place where you came and you had everything you need, as we'll specify as we go along. Avraham and Sarah was so rich that you can understand and imagine that they had a whole army of servants and maidservants, and yet Avraham and Sarah themselves personally tended to the needs of their guests. In fact, we know that it says Avraham's tent, his home, was such a big, large place that he set it up in such a strategic manner that it actually had 4 entrances. Think about it. Every single home typically has one entrance, and then you have a back entrance exit, which is more of a private nature. It's, for you to enter. It's not meant for...
Yard door.
Yeah, yard door. But typically, you don't have more than that. Why not? Because the home is not a public place. The home is a place which by design, by the nature of what it is it's a private place. So you have one home. How many people are meant to come in already? And certainly people are not meant to come in from all directions. Avram's home was not like that. He had 4 in every direction. So nobody should make any mistake thinking, oh, maybe this home's closed. Maybe it's not attractive. It's not inviting for guests. You came from the road that you came. He was literally in the middle of the fork of the road. If you have an imagery in your mind, you saw an open door, welcoming door. Say, come in, it's yours. This he did not when he was 20 years old, when he was 30 years old. He must have done it then too. But here in this Parsha, in Parshat Vayeira, which is chapter 18 in the book of Bereshit, in the book of Genesis, Avraham is 99 years old. I mean, most of us would consider ourselves very, very lucky to live to that age, God willing, healthy and happy. He's 99 years old. In the end of last week's parasha, what did Hashem instruct him to do? To circumcise himself. And that's what he did. Here he is, as the sages tell us, 3 days post this serious surgery, this circumcision, which even for a little baby is painful. For an adult, it's very painful. For an adult that's 99 years old, whew. And here he is, and it says Hashem appeared to him in the groves of Mamre. The groves of Mamre, that's where he was. And Mamre gets some credit here because Mamre was a very, very good friend, a confidant of Avrohom, and he actually assisted him in implementing God's will, and that's where he gets the credit. But that's not what we're going to focus on. And he was sitting at the door of the tent in the heat of the day. Why was he sitting at the door of the tent in the heat of the day? So it says that Hashem really wished for Avrohom to relax. He needs to heal. He needs to go through the process of healing, which is a natural process. Hashem didn't want to just miraculously heal him because he wanted him to feel the actual pain and go through the steps of the mitzvah, as explained elsewhere. And here, Hashem brought out the sun in its full force. Yeah. Imagine, blazing heat, so that there should be no travelers, no wayfarers, so Avrohom can be in peace in his, I guess, air-conditioned home or whatever, in his cool home, not having to deal with the desert heat or with the people tracking in their dirt and serving them and so on. And Hashem knew his customers. He knew Avrohom. He knew that he is one that is, if he's going to see a stranger, if he's going to see someone in need, even though, and regardless of notwithstanding the fact that he just had a circumcision, he's going to run to help this person. So Hashem brought out the sun, no guests, no visitors. Finally, and I have to say, I'm not pointing at anyone, but I can point at myself. Even the best and the most kindest of people, but sometimes when you have a little lull, a little opportunity to like, you know what, there's no kindness that needs to be done, you take in that moment, you enjoy it, you relax, read a book, rest, have a little chat with the wife. I mean, can you imagine all these years Avram and Sarah are so busy running around helping others when they have time for themselves? Avram is sitting at the door of his tent, looking down this road this way, down the road that way. Maybe some strangers are going to pass by, some travelers, so he can do this special mitzvah of giving kindness, of doing kindness with others. When Hashem saw his pain, Hashem sent guests. And that's where it says, he lifted up his eyes and he saw, and behold, 3 men were standing near him. Which is obvious, they were standing near him. Where did they show up from? Where did they come from? It was so hot, the blazing heat did not allow anyone to travel. Imagine the roads were bubbling, the roads were hot, were steaming hot. But they showed up. What happens? He saw them. As soon as he saw them, he ran from the door of the tent to greet them, and he bowed down to the earth. Imagine Avrohom, who was the prince, the most famous person of his time. Perhaps even I can suggest the richest person of his time. Certainly the most pious and most spiritual of his time. And he's bowing for these people who appear as just 3 typical Arab travelers, as we'll soon see. Avram even asks them to wash their feet before they entered his home, out of concern that their feet, these were such low-level idol worshippers, or so he was concerned, perhaps they are, that they had some kind of form of idol worshipping where they would worship the dust under their feet. Imagine what kind of low level it is comparing to, and yet Abraham bows before them. He is so excited. He is so happy that he can do kindness. And then he said, my master. Now, if you look in the Hebrew, it says Adonai, which comes from the word Adon, master, and with the added yud, the suffix of yud, it means my master. What did he say? If I have found favor in your eyes, please do not bypass your servant. Let a bit of water be brought and wash your feet. Rest yourselves under the tree, and I will get bread, and I will sustain you in your hearts. And then it continues telling us how Avram ran, and he even slaughtered, he was so excited, he slaughtered 3 small calves. So to serve him the delicacy each of a tongue, not just, hey, they would be happy with any piece of meat. Any traveler in this heat, somebody who hasn't eaten in a long time, just give me ground beef and I'm happy. You know what I'm saying? Give me some sloppy joes and I'm fine. Yeah. No, Avram is going to serve him the most special delicacy of his time, I guess some kind of cooked or pickled or roasted tongue. It says in mustard. Gout. Just thinking about it can give you gout. Stop. Okay? And he goes all out, pulls all stops to take care of his guests. But let's focus in when it says over here, my master. And I said to you that in the actual Hebrew form is the same word that we use, the same term, the same reference to Hashem himself. This hints to something. Who was he speaking to? He was speaking to somebody in the singular. So, on a very simple, basic level, Rashi tells us you can understand it to mean that he spoke to the one that he assumed is the most important of the three. And usually you can tell that by seeing the one who's in the center, the other two on his either side. Well, this guy must be the most important of the group. Let me address him, and if he stays, they're certainly staying with him. On a deeper level, he actually was speaking to God. And he said, Hashem, don't pass, don't go, but please, can you stay put? Remember, Hashem came to visit him. He revealed himself to him. This is no small thing. This is no small feat. Hashem himself came and revealed himself to him. And he says, Hashem, I'm sorry, I have to take a little rain check on this visit because I have to take care of my guest. I got to do some kindness here. And the sages tell us from here we learn. In fact, it's not only quoted in the Talmud, it's quoted even in the Zohar. A slight variation. That Gdolah Hachnasat Orchim, great is hosting guests, is doing kindness, is feeding others. Mekabalat Pnei Hashchina, from even receiving the face of God's presence, meaning the being in God's presence. Like, wow. And imagine, this takes chutzpah, a positive form of chutzpah, a good one. To say to God, listen, I'm sorry, but I can't entertain you right now because I got some little low-level Arabs traveling, travelers that are traveling through the deserts, nomads, and I got to really feed them a little tongue. Who would think that? That's blasphemy. That's what Avrohom did. That's how powerful it is to take care of others, to tend to the needs of others. This is a very, very important thing. Sadly, very sadly, and I would say even typically, in most circles, if you ask most people, what do you assume to be spiritual, godly? Give me, what's the first thing that comes to mind? Something of that nature? Well, worshiping, right? Serving God, praying. A Jew knows studying Torah, delving into some deep spiritual meditation. No. What do we learn from here? Taking care of others. There's actually a little rationale for it. I saw a very interesting rationale. It actually comes from a book of Kabbalah, from the Shalah, Shnei Luchot HaBrit, Rabbi Yeshayahu Horowitz, and he writes an interesting thing. He says, man, as the Torah tells us, whatever it means, but man was created in the image of God. So when you're receiving the presence of God, the Pnei Hashchina, you can't see it. No matter how holy you are, you can't really see it. Even a holy person can maybe feel something, can feel a difference. But when you're looking at another human being and you're taking care of that human being's needs, he or she is the image of God, because God said so. So there's even a rationale to it. But we don't need the rationale because that's a spiritual rationale. But the fact that we see, and the Torah takes the time, makes a point to mention it, to tell it to us. And remember, let's just remind ourselves, the Torah is not a history book. The Torah is not a storybook. It's not a book of very interesting anecdotes. The Torah is Torah. Torah means Hora'ah, a directive. It's teaching us how to live life. The only difference between this book, say, and a later book of the Torah is that in the later book of the Torah, most often it tells us, do this, don't do that. This is the way this should be done. This is the way I want the offerings to be offered. This is the way I want you to keep the Shabbat. This is the way I want you to do this, and so on. This is telling us exactly the same thing, but in a story form. It's giving us the story. It's giving us a narrative from which actually you can learn far more than when it gives you a direct ruling, a direct law, do this, don't do that. Because there is so many sides, you know what I mean? There is so many It's like a diamond. There are so many angles, and each one carries its own beauty and its own lesson that it teaches you. Okay? A very powerful thing just to point out. If you look at the contrast between verse 4 and verse 5. In verse 4, it says, let some water be taken. What does that imply? That he actually handed this to a messenger. Maybe it was Ishmael, his son. Maybe it was one of the servants. He says, hey, please go bring some water quickly for the guest. The next verse, he says that I will bring bread. You know what the sages point out? That Hashem rewarded us, his children, his descendants, which A tells us that the good deeds of parents are rewarded by the future descendants. Sometimes you see a successful family, you see people in families very successful. It's a generational thing. Or suddenly, it may not necessarily be their zechut, their merit. There could be a grandparent, a great-grandparent that did, and it trickles down. And it starts, that's those seeds of their kindness. The reward starts to sprout in the children or children's children and so on. So Hashem rewarded us when his descendants were strangers. They were also travelers. When were they travelers? Many years later, about 400 years, a little more after this. The Jews are traveling through the desert. They needed to eat, they needed to drink. God provided water, God provided food. But look at the difference. Measure for measure. The water that he had directed, like I said, I'm not sure who it is, his servant or his son, to go bring for the guests, Hashem paid us back exactly the same way. We received the water through an intermediary. How so? When the Jews complained they wanted water, Hashem said to Moshe, you hit the rock. Even though it's obvious and it's very clear that his hitting the rock was valid and had its impact only because of Hashem, but still Hashem shows us, I did it to them. Just like here, the water was Avrohom's. The servant was Avrohom's, and yet through an intermediary. The bread that he himself served, where did the manna fall from? Directly from heaven, directly from Hashem. Shows us to what extent kindness is repaid, to what extent and how specific Hashem is with that. It's amazing, no?
Indeed.
Okay? Now, what I would like to do on this same topic, I want to jump to close to the end of the Parsha, and it describes us the life of Avrohom, even after he resettled, even after he had to change his residence, his place of residence. And if you look, in our book, it's on page 47. This is chapter 21, verse 33. Chapter 21, verse 33. At this point, Avrohom is now living in Beersheba. Okay, Beersheba. Very deserty place. And the Torah describes to us what he did. Now understand, at this point, by the time we're reading this, Avram is way past his 100 years old. Yitzchak has been born. He's about to be born, I beg your pardon. Yitzchak has been born. And Avram is still at it. And look what it says over here. Avram, having settled down in a new place, he bought some property. Avraham planted an ashel. And in the parentheses it says a tree in Beersheba. And there he proclaimed the name of Hashem, Almighty of the universe. Avraham lived in the land of the Philistines for many days. Now, what is this tree that he planted? It's obviously very notable because the Torah makes mention of it, right? Now, it's not trying to tell us that Avraham finally changed his interests and his hobbies, and now he went into gardening. Okay, that's of no importance to us. Did he like gardening? Did he like art? I don't know. Frankly, I don't care. It's telling us something. There's actually a debate in the Talmud exactly what this means. One says, it says ashel in singular, a tree. He planted this big, giant, beautiful tree that gave off delicious fruits, but more importantly, it actually gave tremendous shade, which is understandable. Being in the desert, being in Beersheba, even if you go there today, it's very hot. It's a deserty place. To plant a tree like that took a lot of effort, took a lot of innovation to know how to figure out how to do it and get a source of water and so on. And yet he did it so when his guests come, they not only have a place to eat and to sleep, but now they have a place to sit in the shade, to cool off, and so on and so forth. Another sage actually says no. Even though it says it in singular, it's referring to a lot of trees, meaning sometimes you can call a whole unit, you can call it by the singular, even though there are many, many, many parts to that unit. So in fact, this sage says he actually planted an entire orchard of various types of fruits with which to feed his guests, to bring them pleasure. And another suggests actually, because we don't ever really find in the Torah, a tree being referred to with this title of Ashel, that it's not actually a tree, but Ashel actually, he says, serves as an acronym for Aleph is Achila, which means eating, Shin is for Shtiyah, which means drinking, and Lamed is for Lina, which means a place to sleep. So he actually built an entire guest house, not for himself and his friends to come and party, rather for that people should have a place, a comfortable place to sleep and eat and so on. And he planted it. What does it mean? Why does he use the word he planted? If it's referring to a house, why does he use this verb? So it's actually that he didn't just plant it, he didn't just set it up for then, but he planted that seed in our hearts for all perpetual generations, that all his descendants have this character trait of doing kindness, of giving kindness. The Rebbe points out something very, very interesting. Whenever there's a debate, whenever there's a discussion, we need to really look at it and analyze it. If it's a debate that's about some kind of ideology or some concept, well, one feels like this, one holds like that, it's fine. But when it comes to a debate about a fact, it either happened this way or it happened that way. The fact that the Talmud records this debate tells us that there's legitimacy to each and every opinion. Otherwise, one is right, one is wrong. So each one on some level is right. So indeed, we must reach the conclusion that all three opinions are valid. That all happened. He built a big giant guest house. He planted an entire orchard. And he planted this special big giant tree near the guest house where before even or after the guests enjoy the food, but they can also have that leisure of sitting outside, enjoying the fresh open air in this beautiful shade in a place that typically would be the sun would be beating down on their heads. What do you see from this? But still, all of that is included in this Ashel word, which means a tree that gives fruits. So the Rebbe says, let's examine, let's analyze the fruit. What is really a fruit, if you think about it? Fruits versus vegetables versus grains versus legumes. It's a sweet thing. Let's be real. It's something you can live without. In other words, you don't really need it for your basic nutrition. Now, I'm not fighting here with the pyramid or whatever it is. But a fruit is more something to give you, they have in schools. Dessert. It's a dessert. They're going to respond. You know why? Because it's just in human nature. You can't see somebody else suffer. But what are you going to respond with? The basics, what they need. If a person is starving, you give him a piece of bread. You might give him something to eat with the bread. Right? But you're not going to go out there and buy them a 5-star, take them to a 5-star restaurant. You're like, hey, the guy's hungry, starving. I'll give him food. I'll make him good. And that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. But that's not yet the kindness of Avrohom. The kindness of Avrohom is such you don't need to provide the basic needs. You don't just give the person fill their basic void. But you make him whole and then some. Provide the best. I don't want to use the extreme example that I use quite often. People tell me, Rabbi, I do charity. I always give my old clothing to Goodwill and so on. I'm like, wow, that's just, out of the park, kindness. Instead of throwing it to the garbage, you're so kind and you give it. That's not charity. Okay, that's just not being absolutely cruel. And someone can use it, why throw it in the garbage and let it end up in a landfill? And even when you give someone the basic need, oh yeah, I gave him $1. Really, how far can that dollar go? Did you stop and make the person feel good? Did you maybe just give the person, you know what, you bought them a meal, give them a scoop of ice cream with it. Make them feel some sweetness in their mouth. Give them a fruit. Do what Avrohom did. That already requires some self-sacrifice. And that explains something amazing. You know, even though in the Torah, there are many stories, there are many episodes which don't necessarily connect. But there are times when the Torah tells us, and the Torah is giving us a narrative, and then the Torah connects it. If you look in chapter 22, what does it say? After these events. Or literally in Hebrew, and it was after. And, what does and do? And connects what we just previously spoke about. So it tells us that after this, describing to us the extreme level of the kindness of Avrohom, what does the Torah tell us? The next chapter in his life, which is the most important one, the test of the Akedah, the binding of Yitzchak. And we beat this drum over and over and over again, and rightfully so, every single day of our lives. Yom Kippur, Rosh Hashanah, wow, to no end. Because it's indeed self-sacrifice. Says the Rebbe, that's what it is. Self-sacrifice and kindness. What does that lead to? Look what it says. And there he proclaimed the name of Hashem. If you want to really proclaim the name of Hashem, remember what I said before, to really be godly, it's not to open a prayer book and stick your nose in the prayer book. It's to stick your nose out of the prayer book and find someone in need. And then when you found a person, you don't just fill their need, but give them more. Have self-sacrifice for that. That's when Hashem tests you and proves that you also have self-sacrifice in your relationship with Hashem. That is
to be fast in order to do a mitzvah.
That is very good. To be swift. That is the hallmark of who we are. This is the stamp of the DNA of every single Jew. Of course, we need to work at it, getting better at it, but this is what it's about. Don't just give a person the basic needs. Don't just say, okay, look, if you're walking down the road and somebody is hungry, of course you're not going to just walk by, or you're not going to certainly, just ignore them. You're going to do something. You'll give them your shit. Go out of your way. You say, well, why? I'll tell you what. Even if somebody is not spiritually on that level, do it because it pays. Look at Avrohom. Hashem gave him this wonderful position of being the patriarch, and his wife the matriarch of this special nation that received the Torah and so have the opportunity to be so close to Hashem. Because of this, Hashem says because of his kindness, because of it. It didn't say because he studied so much Torah. It doesn't say because he knew how to pray so well or knew how to sing the prayer, chant the liturgy so well. Because of the kindness that he did. And this is something that needs to be a guidepost in our lives. How to go out of our way to be kind to somebody, to another person, especially a stranger. May Hashem give us always all the means to do so.